The ancient city, once a thriving hub of culture, civilization, and mystery, has vanished from history. A place so remarkable, its story should have been passed down through the ages, but instead, it's a forgotten chapter. Its name doesn't appear in history books, and its disappearance is not documented in any archives. The city was abandoned without any clear reason. No written record exists, no official explanation for the catastrophe that led to its sudden fall. Today all that remains are ruins. Crumbled walls, faded murals, and remnants of an ancient civilization that once flourished. These physical traces are all that's left of the city's grand narrative. Yet, despite the silence of history, the echoes of the city's past still reverberate in the minds of those who venture into the desolate remains. Those who seek the answers to why the city was abandoned, and what, if anything, could have caused it. The mystery of this city has puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries. As far back as anyone can remember, there have been theories, myths, and speculations. Some say it was a plague that wiped out its people. Others insist that the city's downfall was the result of war, perhaps a violent conquest by a neighboring kingdom. There are even those who point to strange, supernatural forces, suggesting that the city's inhabitants angered the gods, leading to their punishment and the city's eventual collapse. But none of these theories explain the entire story. No one can say for certain why the city was abandoned so suddenly, and no records exist that even hint at the true cause. There are no written documents detailing the event, no survivors left to tell the tale. The city simply vanished. What was once a bustling center of life is now a shadow of its former self, its purpose and its fate shrouded in darkness. What makes this story even more intriguing is that, despite the overwhelming silence in the historical record, there are small clues, anomalies if you will, that hint at a much deeper mystery. Over the years, archaeologists have uncovered fragments of this lost civilization: pottery shards, broken tools, jewelry, and the occasional piece of art. These remnants tell a tale of a society that was advanced, sophisticated, and full of promise. Yet they are also pieces of a puzzle that doesn't quite fit. These items, found in various locations throughout the site, suggest a story of sudden and violent change, something that disrupted the flow of everyday life and forced the inhabitants to leave in haste. There are whispers among local legend bearers that the city's people did not simply abandon their homes out of necessity or convenience. Some claim the city was cursed. Others talk about a terrible event that occurred in the dark of night, an event that was so shocking, so terrifying, that it shattered the very foundation of the city's existence. Yet all of these stories are just that, whispers. The facts are few, the records non-existent. In the absence of solid evidence, speculation has run rampant. Theories have grown more elaborate over time, and with each new discovery, new possibilities emerge. The artifacts found in the city raise more questions than answers. Were these objects simply everyday items discarded in haste, or do they carry some deeper meaning, symbols of the forces at work in the city's final days? In recent years, the story of the city has begun to gain new attention. Modern-day explorers, archaeologists, and historians have taken a renewed interest in the ruins, hoping to uncover new evidence that could shed light on the city's disappearance. They venture into the forgotten city, combing through its ruins with the hope of finding something, anything, that could explain why it was abandoned and what truly happened there. Some of these explorers have reported strange occurrences while investigating the site. Unexplained noises, eerie feelings of being watched, and a sense of unease that permeates the air. Are these simply the imaginations of those who have spent too long among ancient ruins, or is there something more to these experiences? Perhaps the city's past still lingers, a haunting reminder of what once was. Those who venture into its depths often describe a peculiar sense of dread, as if something is just out of sight, lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The lack of concrete information only fuels the mystery, adding to the sense of intrigue that surrounds the site. Some believe that the city's secrets are too dangerous to be known, so dangerous that they were deliberately erased from history. This theory suggests that there were forces at play far more powerful than any natural disaster or military conflict. Something more insidious, something that struck at the very core of the city's existence. To understand what happened to the city, one must first ask, why did it fall in the first place? Was it a natural disaster, such as a plague or a volcanic eruption, that forced the inhabitants to flee? Was it the result of war, an invasion by a foreign power bent on conquest? Or was it something darker, something hidden from the world, a secret that had been buried for centuries? The idea that the city's downfall was the result of something supernatural is not as far-fetched as it might seem. Ancient civilizations often believed in the power of gods, spirits, and curses. In times of crisis, It was common for people to seek out divine intervention or, in some cases, to offer sacrifices to appease the gods. Could the city's inhabitants have angered their gods in some way, leading to a curse that doomed the city to destruction? There are also those who believe that the city's fall was a result of a catastrophic event, a violent rebellion, a betrayal from within, or perhaps even a curse laid upon the city by a long-forgotten enemy. But whatever the cause, the city's fate remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. In the years since the city's abandonment, many attempts have been made to unravel its secrets. Archaeologists have unearthed remnants of the city's infrastructure, but they have yet to find any definitive answer as to why the city was abandoned. There are no written records, no surviving accounts from the people who lived there, and no reliable eyewitnesses to tell the tale. And yet, despite the silence, there is a sense of foreboding that hangs over the ruins, as though the city's story is one that will never be fully told. The truth may be hidden, buried beneath layers of time, but its shadow still lingers, waiting to be uncovered. The deeper one delves into the mystery of the ancient city, the more questions arise. What was the catalyst for the city's fall? Why were its people forced to leave everything behind? What dark secrets are locked away in the ruins? For now, these questions remain unanswered, and the city's tragic tale remains untold, an enigma that continues to haunt the world's collective imagination. And as we seek the truth, we find ourselves asking, what truly happened to this lost city, and what does its disappearance tell us about the ancient world, and perhaps about ourselves? The ancient city, once a beacon of civilization, stood as a testament to human ingenuity and achievement. It was not just a place of trade or politics, it was a cultural hub, a thriving center where people from all walks of life converged. Its streets were alive with merchants peddling their goods, artisans shaping masterpieces, and scholars engaging in intellectual discourse. This city, nestled in the heart of an ancient empire, flourished for centuries, its architecture a blend of sophistication and grandeur, its culture rich with stories, myths, and beliefs passed down through generations. From the moment it was founded, the city grew rapidly, attracting settlers from all over the known world. Its location made it a crossroads of sorts, a meeting point for different cultures, religions, and ideas. The people who called it home were not just survivors of harsh climates or political upheaval, they were builders, dreamers, and thinkers. They constructed grand temples dedicated to their gods, intricate roads that connected their vast empire, and monumental structures that would become symbols of their greatness. The city's central marketplace buzzed with life, offering everything from exotic spices to luxurious textiles, from fine pottery to rare jewels. It was a place where people came to prosper, where they could make their mark on history. Yet, as prosperous as the city was, it was also a place of mystery, its history shrouded in secrets. Scholars and historians have long puzzled over the origins of the city, who founded it, why it was built in such a remote location, and what lay at the heart of its cultural and political significance. It seemed as though every discovery made within the city's ruins only led to more questions. Why were the grand temples built in such intricate ways? What did the symbols etched into their walls mean? Why were certain rooms in the palaces sealed off, their entrances hidden beneath layers of rubble? These questions linger, unanswered, their answers perhaps lost to the sands of time. At its height, the city was a marvel of architecture and engineering. The roads were paved with stones, perfectly aligned, stretching for miles in every direction, making travel easy for merchants and citizens alike. The buildings were constructed with precision, the walls adorned with elaborate murals depicting scenes from daily life, from religious ceremonies to harvest festivals, to the grandiose victories of the city's rulers. The city had a well-developed system of governance, with laws that ensured peace and order, and a military force that protected its borders. Its inhabitants had everything they needed: food, water, shelter, security. They lived in relative peace, or so it seemed on the surface. The city's culture was equally complex. Its people were not only skilled builders and traders, but also accomplished artists, poets, and philosophers. They created works of art that have survived through the ages, pieces that still hang in the museums of the world today. They were also deeply religious, their temples dedicated to gods whose names are now forgotten, but whose power was believed to shape the very fabric of life itself. The city's calendar was full of festivals and ceremonies, each one more elaborate than the last, a way for the people to honor their gods and ensure their favor. But despite the outward appearance of a flourishing society, cracks were beginning to form beneath the surface. Even in its heyday, there were signs that something was not quite right. There were rumors, whispers that spread through the city like wildfire. Some claimed that the gods had become displeased with the people, that the sacrifices were no longer enough to appease them. Others spoke of unrest within the ruling class, of political intrigue and power struggles that threatened to tear the city apart from within. And then there were those who pointed to the city's growing wealth and influence, suggesting that the rulers had grown greedy, corrupt, and disconnected from the needs of the people. But despite these rumors, the city continued to thrive. It became a symbol of power and prosperity, attracting more settlers, traders, and scholars from far and wide. It was a place of opportunity, where anyone could come and make their fortune. Its rulers, though seemingly distant and aloof, were adored by the people, their statues erected in the city's public squares, their names inscribed on every stone and tablet. They were seen as benevolent, wise leaders, guiding the city through its golden age. It was during this time, in the midst of the city's prosperity, that the first signs of trouble began to appear. It started subtly, small, insignificant events that seemed out of place. A strange illness began to spread through the lower districts, affecting the poorest members of society. At first, it was dismissed as a minor outbreak, something that would pass in time. But it didn't. The sickness spread, and as it did, whispers began to circulate that the gods had withdrawn their favor from the city. Those who had once been healthy and strong began to waste away, their skin turning pale and their bodies weakening. In the temples, priests performed desperate rituals, calling on the gods to deliver the city from its fate, but their prayers went unanswered. As the disease spread, so too did panic. The once bustling streets grew quiet as people began to leave, fleeing to other cities in search of safety. The markets, once filled with traders and shoppers, were now barren, the stalls left empty, the goods unsold. It seemed as though the city's vibrant pulse had slowed to a stop. For the first time in centuries, the great metropolis seemed fragile, vulnerable. And yet, even in the face of the growing crisis, the ruling elite remained indifferent. They continued to live in their palaces, far removed from the suffering in the streets below. But the disease was not the only problem facing the city. Political unrest was also beginning to boil over. Factions within the ruling class, once united in their pursuit of power, began to fracture. Rivalries turned into open conflict, as different factions fought for control of the city's future. What had once been a stable and prosperous government began to unravel, with corruption and betrayal eating away at its foundation. The military, once a strong and loyal force, began to splinter as well, with generals turning against each other in a desperate bid for power. The once proud city, which had stood as a beacon of civilization, was now teetering on the brink of collapse. The people, once so confident in their rulers and their gods, were now questioning everything they had known. Were their gods angry with them? Had they been forsaken? And if so, why? The answers, if they existed, remained elusive, hidden somewhere deep within the city's vast network of ruins. As the city descended further into chaos, something even darker began to take root. Strange events, unexplainable by any logic, began to unfold. People began to report seeing strange lights in the sky at night, flickering, ghostly images that would disappear as quickly as they had appeared. Some spoke of figures moving through the shadows, whispering in languages no one recognized. Others claimed to have witnessed strange rituals, conducted in the dead of night, by those who had once held power. What these rituals entailed, no one knew for sure, but there were rumors, dangerous rumors, that the rulers had turned to dark forces in a desperate attempt to save the city. The question on everyone's mind was simple: what had happened to the city's gods? Had they turned their backs on their people, or had something even darker taken their place? Despite the growing fear, the rulers of the city did nothing. They remained in their palaces, isolated from the turmoil below. Some say they were blind to the suffering of the people. Others claimed they knew exactly what was happening but chose to ignore it. Either way, the city continued its slow, agonizing decline, a once great civilization crumbling from within. The final days of the city were marked by desperation. The streets were empty, the markets silent. The disease had taken its toll, and the political turmoil had reached a breaking point. The city that had once stood as a symbol of human achievement was now nothing more than a shell of its former self. And when the last of its people abandoned it, there was no official record of their departure. No grand exodus, no final declaration. They simply left, vanishing into the night, leaving behind a city that would remain abandoned for centuries to come. The mysteries surrounding the fall of this city remain unsolved to this day. What exactly caused its downfall? Was it the disease? The political unrest? Or was it something darker, something far more sinister? As the centuries have passed, the city's secrets have remained buried, and its story has become just another forgotten chapter in the annals of history. Yet, despite the passage of time, the city's haunting legacy continues to captivate those who seek the truth behind its mysterious disappearance. As the years went on, the city that once thrived with life and activity began to fade from memory, leaving only crumbling stone walls and fragments of its glorious past behind. It was as though the city's abandonment happened overnight, as if a veil of silence had descended upon it, erasing any trace of its former vibrancy. The city was not left in ruins because of war, nor was it destroyed by an enemy force. No, it was simply abandoned by its people. And yet the question remained, why? Why did an entire civilization, once prosperous and full of potential, suddenly vanish from the pages of history? In the years following the city's disappearance, local legends began to sprout, growing in both complexity and intrigue. Some stories claimed that the city had been struck by a devastating plague, one so severe that it wiped out its population within a matter of weeks. The disease, according to these accounts, was unlike anything anyone had ever seen, an illness that twisted the body and mind, turning the afflicted into something unrecognizable. But was that the truth? Did a plague really bring about the city's fall, or was there something more sinister at play? The idea of a plague was a popular explanation, particularly among those who had no access to the city's ruins. The survivors, those few who managed to escape the disaster, spoke of a strange illness that spread with terrifying speed. But the more scholars delved into the abandoned city's remains, the more they discovered that the answer wasn't as straightforward as a simple epidemic. Evidence found in the ruins painted a different picture, one of people leaving in haste as if running from something far more terrifying than disease. There were no signs of widespread deaths. In fact, there were very few bodies left behind and no signs of a mass burial. If a plague had truly ravaged the city, why were there no traces of it in the skeletal remains? The answer, it seemed, wasn't so simple. Archaeological findings only added to the mystery. As researchers carefully combed through the city's ruins, they discovered strange and unsettling things. Tools and weapons were abandoned mid-use, suggesting that people had left in the middle of their daily routines. Shelves in homes were left stacked with food and supplies, as if the inhabitants had simply turned their backs on their lives and walked away without warning. In some of the temples, intricate altars and ceremonial objects had been left untouched, as if the priests and worshippers had vanished in the midst of their rituals. The scale of this sudden abandonment was unlike anything that had ever been seen before. What made the situation even more perplexing was the absence of any official records documenting the event. In a city so meticulous about its history, with walls inscribed with stories of conquest and achievements, it was almost impossible to believe that such a monumental event could have gone completely unrecorded. There were no tablets, no scrolls, no inscriptions that described what happened to the city's people. It was as if the event had been deliberately erased from history, buried beneath layers of time. As more evidence came to light, a different theory began to emerge, one that was more complex and more unsettling than a simple plague or military invasion. The idea that the city had been the site of a catastrophic event, an event so horrific that its survivors fled in terror, erasing all traces of it, began to take hold. What if the city had been the epicenter of something far darker? Something that could not be explained by any conventional means? There were rumors, whispered by those who dared to speak of the past, that suggested the city's downfall had not been the result of external forces, but of something much more insidious. Some believed that the city had been the victim of a curse, a dark force that had been unleashed upon it. These rumors spoke of forbidden rituals, of ancient gods whose wrath had been awakened by the arrogance of the city's rulers. The idea that the city had been the site of a ritualistic tragedy, one that had gone terribly wrong, began to take root in the minds of those who studied its history. According to these theories, the people of the city had once been devout in their worship, performing rituals to honor the gods who ruled over them. But as the city grew, so too did the ambition of its leaders. They sought to gain favor from the gods, to harness their power and bend it to their will. In their quest for greater control, the city's rulers began to engage in increasingly dangerous and forbidden rituals, ones that delved into the dark realms of the supernatural. Some whispered that these rituals had been meant to bring the gods closer, to summon their favor and power. But as the rituals became more complex, more desperate, the line between devotion and madness began to blur. There were accounts, though sketchy and fragmented, of strange occurrences in the years leading up to the city's abandonment. Visitors to the city reported seeing unusual lights flickering in the sky at night, and locals spoke of eerie sounds coming from the deep chambers beneath the temples. Some claimed to have witnessed the rulers conducting secret ceremonies, hidden from the public eye, deep within the heart of the city. These ceremonies, according to rumors, involved strange symbols and offerings that were far from the traditional sacrifices of the city's religion. As the rituals grew more elaborate, so did the paranoia of the people. Whispers began to spread that something was wrong, something terrible was happening in the depths of the city, and the people were paying the price for it. It wasn't long before the rumors escalated, and the city's residents began to flee in fear. There were no armies marching to the gates, no invading forces, but the city's people could no longer deny the terror that had taken hold. The priests, once revered as intermediaries between the gods and the people, began to disappear. Some said they had fled, others that they had been swallowed by the very forces they had sought to control. The city's leaders were nowhere to be found, their palaces abandoned, their names forgotten. The once immense temples, now empty and silent, stood as silent witnesses to the horrors that had unfolded within their walls. The people who remained in the city could no longer ignore the signs. The walls seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, and the air itself was thick with an oppressive, suffocating feeling. It was as if the city itself had become alive, a living entity that had turned against its creators. Some claimed to have heard voices in the wind, faint whispers calling them to leave before it was too late. Others spoke of shadows moving where no shadows should be, and strange visions that plagued their dreams. It was clear that something was wrong, something beyond their understanding. The city's final days were marked by chaos and confusion. Those who remained had no clear leader, no direction, and no hope. The marketplaces, once bustling with activity, were now empty, the stalls abandoned and covered in dust. The great halls of government were silent, and the streets were eerily deserted. One by one, the people packed up and left, fleeing into the unknown, leaving their city behind. When the last of the inhabitants had disappeared, there was nothing left to mark their passing. No final word, no explanation, no record of what had happened. The city, once full of life and promise, was now an empty shell, a ghost of its former self. For centuries it lay abandoned, its secrets hidden beneath the earth, waiting to be uncovered. To this day no one knows the full truth of what happened to the city. Was it the result of a natural disaster, a plague, or something far darker? What were the rulers of the city truly seeking with their dangerous rituals? And why did the people leave without a trace? The answers to these questions remain elusive, buried beneath the ruins of a once great civilization. The city's story, though forgotten by most, continues to haunt the world, a reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries are those that remain unsolved. The ruins of the ancient city, though silent and still, have much to say. For those who dare to uncover its secrets, the remnants left behind speak volumes about the civilization that once called it home. Among the rubble, archaeologists and explorers have uncovered a wide range of artifacts, each one offering tantalizing glimpses into the daily lives of the people who once thrived here. But what makes these discoveries so unsettling is not just their age or historical value, it's the sense of unease that permeates each find. These objects, seemingly ordinary, hint at a much darker narrative, one that has been buried for centuries. What were the people of this city really running from, and what did these artifacts reveal about their final days? Among the most chilling discoveries are the strange symbols and ritualistic tools found within the city's temples and hidden chambers. These objects suggest that the city's downfall wasn't the result of an external force, but rather something far more insidious, a series of events set in motion by the city's rulers themselves. The tools found in the ruins weren't simply used for daily tasks. They were ceremonial in nature, designed for rituals that seemed to have been aimed at contacting forces beyond the physical realm. The materials used to craft these objects were rare, often linked to ancient practices that had been long abandoned by other civilizations. Yet, here they were, scattered throughout the city, as if the inhabitants had become obsessed with something far beyond their understanding. The more scholars study these objects, the more they become convinced that the city's rulers were involved in something far darker than anyone could have anticipated. Some of the tools are crafted from materials that seem almost otherworldly, infused with metals and minerals that don't quite match anything from known sources. There are also bizarre carvings on the objects, intricate, swirling patterns that resemble ancient symbols from lost cultures. The sheer complexity and detail of these designs suggest that the rituals performed here were not only secret but perhaps dangerous, drawing on powers that most would have considered forbidden. It's as if the rulers of the city were trying to tap into something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. One of the most disturbing finds came in the form of a set of stone tablets, each inscribed with an ancient language that had been thought to be lost to time. The script was indecipherable to most modern scholars, but when experts began to translate it, they uncovered references to a dark deity, an entity worshipped by the city's rulers in secret, one that demanded sacrifices and offered power in return. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the city's leaders had become obsessed with this god, believing that through ritualistic practices, they could control its power. These practices, however, would prove to have consequences far beyond what they had imagined. Along with these ritual tools, archaeologists found remains of offerings, objects that had been left behind in the temples as part of the ceremonies. Some of these offerings were mundane, everyday items such as pottery and jewelry, but others were far more disturbing. There were human bones, broken and charred, placed in patterns that suggested they had been part of a ritual sacrifice. The remains appeared to have been carefully arranged, almost as if the rulers had been following a strict set of instructions, perhaps handed down from an ancient priesthood or a forgotten culture. It was clear that the rituals weren't just symbolic. They were real, physical acts meant to summon forces far beyond human control. The more these offerings were studied, the more it became apparent that something had gone terribly wrong in the city. The idea of sacrifices to dark gods wasn't new. Throughout history there have been instances of civilizations engaging in such practices, often to appease deities they believed held power over their fate. But what was troubling about these sacrifices was their brutality. The bones of the victims were not only arranged in ritualistic patterns but showed signs of torture and prolonged suffering. The marks on the bones, the burns and the mutilations, these weren't just offerings made out of devotion, they were signs of desperation and fear. It was as though the rulers of the city had gone to extreme lengths to try and control the very forces they had awakened, but in doing so, they had invited a darkness into their midst that they could no longer control. Even more unsettling was the discovery of a hidden chamber deep beneath one of the city's grand temples. This chamber, sealed for centuries, contained the remnants of a large stone altar, covered in symbols that didn't match anything from known religious practices. The altar was surrounded by a ring of stones, each one etched with cryptic markings that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. In the center of the altar lay a small, strange idol, carved from a dark, smooth stone that seemed to absorb the light around it. The idol was shaped like a grotesque creature, its features distorted and unsettling, and it was clear that it had once been the focus of many rituals. But what made the discovery truly horrifying was the fact that the altar appeared to have been used very recently. The stone was still warm to the touch, and there were faint traces of blood, new blood, on the surface. The presence of fresh blood, combined with the disturbing nature of the artifacts, led to the theory that the city's rulers had been involved in rituals that had continued up until the very day of the city's abandonment. It was as though the city's inhabitants had been caught in the throes of some unimaginable force, one that had driven them to the brink of madness. The rulers had believed they could control this dark power, but in their arrogance, they had only opened a door that should never have been opened. Whatever force they had summoned had come with a terrible price, and the city was paying it. The symbolism of the dark idol and the rituals conducted around it suggested a connection to something much older than the city itself. Some theorists proposed that the rulers had uncovered forgotten knowledge that had been buried by other civilizations long ago, knowledge that had been deemed too dangerous to keep. The idol, with its grotesque form, was thought to be a representation of an ancient being, an entity of chaos and destruction, one that existed before the rise of the gods that the city had once worshipped. Some believed that the rulers had sought to summon this being, believing they could harness its power to make their city immortal. But in doing so, they had triggered a chain of events that led to the city's downfall. These disturbing findings painted a picture of a city whose leaders, once proud and powerful, had descended into madness. They had sought to control forces beyond their comprehension, and in doing so they had sealed their own fate. The city, once a beacon of civilization, had become a prison of terror, its people fleeing in the dead of night, leaving behind not only their homes but the very soul of their civilization. As more discoveries were made, the evidence grew stronger that the city's fall had been no accident. It was the result of something far more sinister, a tale of human ambition and supernatural forces intertwining in a way that no one could have predicted. The artifacts, the altars, the offerings, all of them pointed to a civilization that had been consumed by its own search for power. The rulers had paid the ultimate price for their hubris, and their city had paid with its life. Today, as researchers continue to explore the ruins, the story of the city remains one of the greatest mysteries of the ancient world. Its artifacts, though now carefully catalogued and studied, still haunt the minds of those who examine them. What were the rulers truly after? What drove them to take such dangerous actions? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what was the force they sought to control, and why did it lead to the city's destruction? These questions, though partially answered through the discovery of the artifacts, continue to linger just out of reach, much like the dark powers that once held sway over the city. As the mystery surrounding the city's sudden downfall deepens, so too do the theories about what truly caused its destruction. With each passing year, new discoveries emerge, and the puzzle grows more intricate, revealing a complexity that was once unimaginable. Historians, archaeologists, and even conspiracy theorists have weighed in on the city's demise, offering a range of explanations that stretch from the plausible to the downright bizarre. But as more evidence is uncovered, it becomes increasingly clear that the truth behind the city's fall is far more complex, and far darker, than anyone could have imagined. At first glance, the most logical explanation seems to be a natural disaster. After all, the region where the city was built was known to be prone to earthquakes and floods. Could it be that a catastrophic event, such as a massive earthquake or a sudden flood, caused the inhabitants to flee in panic, abandoning their homes and possessions? The city's sudden abandonment could easily be explained by such a disaster, one that caught the people off guard and left them no time to prepare. But as researchers combed through the ruins, they found no evidence of such an event. The buildings, while weathered by time, showed no signs of collapse due to an earthquake. There were no traces of flooding in the lower levels of the city. In fact, the signs pointed to something much more deliberate, a calculated and hasty departure, as if the people had left with a sense of fear and urgency, not because of a sudden natural disaster. Some experts suggested that perhaps the city had been the victim of an invasion. The region was strategically located, making it a prime target for neighboring kingdoms and rival empires. The city's wealth and power would have made it a tempting prize for any ambitious conqueror. It seemed logical then to assume that the city's downfall could have been the result of a military attack, an invasion by a foreign power that forced the inhabitants to flee. However, upon further examination of the city's remains, it became clear that there were no signs of a military siege. The walls, while damaged, did not show the kind of battle scars one would expect from a prolonged conflict. There were no arrows, no weapons left behind, and most telling of all, no evidence of a large-scale battle. The city had been abandoned far too suddenly for it to have been overrun by an invading force. The more researchers dug into the city's history, the more they began to wonder if the cause of its downfall could be linked to internal strife. There were rumors of political instability in the years leading up to the city's disappearance. Factions within the ruling class had begun to clash, and whispers of power struggles and betrayals spread like wildfire. Some believed that the city's leaders had been so consumed by their ambition and infighting that they failed to recognize the signs of impending disaster until it was too late. If the rulers had been focused on consolidating their own power, they may have neglected the welfare of the people, leading to widespread unrest and a collapse in order and governance. Could it be that the rulers' infighting led to a breakdown of society itself, forcing the people to flee before it was too late? But even this theory does not fully explain the strange and eerie elements found in the city's ruins. It doesn't account for the ritualistic tools or the mysterious altar, nor the unsettling symbols that seem to point to a darker, more supernatural cause. There was something deeply unsettling about the way the city's inhabitants had left, as if they were running from an unseen force, a force that could not be explained by war or political unrest alone. And then there were the theories that veered into the realm of the supernatural. Over the years, numerous accounts had emerged, claiming that the city's rulers had angered the gods through their actions. The rituals performed in secret, the sacrifices made in the dead of night, these were not acts of devotion but of desperation. Some believed that the city's rulers had been searching for immortality, attempting to unlock the secrets of life and death through forbidden practices. They had called upon the gods for power, but instead, they had unleashed something much darker, an ancient and malevolent force that had consumed them. The theory went that the city's downfall was the result of this supernatural entity taking control, driving the rulers to madness and forcing the inhabitants to flee before it was too late. While the idea of a curse or supernatural retribution might seem far-fetched, the evidence supporting this theory continued to grow. The strange idol found in the hidden chamber beneath the temple, the eerie symbols etched into the walls of the city's sacred sites, and the disturbing reports of visions and strange phenomena all pointed to something beyond the physical realm. Had the rulers unwittingly summoned a dark power? Had they opened a doorway to a world of nightmares? The more the evidence piled up, the more it seemed that something beyond human comprehension had been at work in the city, a force that could not be explained by simple logic or reason. For some, the answer lay in the idea that the city's rulers had been attempting to harness forbidden knowledge that had been hidden away for centuries. They had uncovered ancient texts, lost languages, and forgotten rituals, believing that by mastering them, they could gain access to untold power. But in their arrogance, they had failed to understand the true nature of what they were dealing with. They had been playing with fire, and in the end they had been consumed by it. The city's fall then was not just the result of political corruption, war, or disaster. It was the tragic consequence of humanity's relentless pursuit of power without understanding the price. The darkest theory of all, however, was one that few dared to speak aloud. What if the city had not been destroyed by a natural disaster, an invasion, or internal strife? What if the city had been abandoned deliberately, by a collective decision to leave, not just because of fear, but because the inhabitants had realized the terrible truth? What if they had left not because they were running from something, but because they had been given a glimpse of the unimaginable, a knowledge so horrifying that they chose to vanish from the world entirely, abandoning everything in order to escape its grasp? This theory suggested that the people of the city had somehow uncovered a truth, something about the nature of their world or their gods or the universe itself, that was so terrifying that they chose to leave their civilization behind. Perhaps they had been warned by the gods, or by some force beyond their understanding, that their time had come to an end. Maybe they had learned that the city's power had been built on something inherently evil, something that could never be fully understood or controlled. In their terror, they had decided to abandon their homes, their families, and their entire way of life, knowing that the only way to survive was to leave everything behind. The idea of a mass exodus, of a civilization choosing to walk away from everything it had built, is a chilling thought. It suggests that the city's downfall wasn't a matter of survival or conquest. It was a conscious, terrifying decision made by the people who once called it home. This theory, though unsettling, provides the most disturbing explanation of all, that the city's inhabitants knew what was coming, and rather than face the consequences, they chose to disappear. And in doing so, they left behind not only their homes, but the answers to the mystery that has haunted the world for centuries. Whatever the true cause of the city's downfall, one thing is certain: it was no ordinary event. The sudden and inexplicable abandonment of an entire civilization points to forces far beyond our understanding. Whether it was the result of supernatural forces, political intrigue, or a catastrophic event, the truth remains elusive, buried beneath the ruins of a forgotten city. And perhaps, in the end, that is the most haunting mystery of all, because some secrets are meant to stay buried, forever lost in the shadows of time. The search for answers continues, though the passage of time has only deepened the mystery of this forgotten city. Researchers, explorers, and even thrill-seekers have flocked to the site, each hoping to uncover the truth behind its abandonment, but each discovery seems to raise more questions than it answers. The more one delves into the past of this ancient civilization, the more it becomes apparent that there is something about this city that was never meant to be uncovered. Its secrets, once lost to the annals of history, are now slowly being dragged back into the light, and in doing so, they reveal a narrative of humanity's ambition, hubris, and perhaps even its deepest fears. One of the most fascinating aspects of the city's history is the contrast between its seemingly idyllic rise and its catastrophic fall. At its peak, the city was a marvel of human achievement. Its architecture was advanced, its streets lined with magnificent buildings that demonstrated the technical prowess and artistic sophistication of its people. The city's infrastructure was unparalleled: roads that connected it to other settlements, aqueducts that brought fresh water from distant mountains, and a network of canals that made transportation and trade more efficient. The people of the city had mastered the art of living in harmony with their environment, harnessing the power of the natural world to create a prosperous society. Culturally, the city was a beacon of enlightenment. It was a place where scholars and philosophers gathered to discuss the mysteries of the universe, where artists and musicians created works that would be revered for centuries, and where the intellectual and creative pursuits of the people were encouraged and celebrated. It was a society that prized knowledge and beauty, a society that seemed destined for greatness. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. The people of the city had achieved so much, yet they were still hungry for more. In their quest for power, they began to seek out knowledge that had been buried by previous generations. They sought to unlock the secrets of life and death, to control forces that were beyond their understanding. This quest for power, for mastery over the unknown, led them to experiment with forbidden rituals, to delve into realms that most ancient societies had long avoided. What had once been a peaceful civilization now found itself teetering on the edge of madness, as the very forces they sought to control began to unravel the fabric of their society. The rulers, once wise and revered, had begun to lose their grip on reality. Their obsession with power, with immortality, led them down a path from which there was no return. They surrounded themselves with mystics, shamans, and occultists, people who promised them the answers they so desperately sought. These practitioners, many of whom had been exiled from other cultures for their radical beliefs, offered the rulers the keys to unlocking the mysteries of the universe. But in doing so, they unleashed forces that could not be controlled. The rituals grew more elaborate, more extreme. No longer satisfied with mere offerings to the gods, the city's leaders sought to harness dark powers, to bend them to their will. They invoked spirits, demons, and deities that had not been worshipped for centuries, hoping to gain their favor. They believed that through these rituals they could transcend the limits of mortality, that they could achieve eternal life. But with each ritual, the line between the physical and the supernatural began to blur, and the consequences of their actions became more pronounced. As the rituals grew more dangerous, strange occurrences began to plague the city. People started to disappear. First the scholars, then the priests, then the workers and merchants. No one knew where they had gone and no one dared to ask. But the whispers began to spread. Whispers of a curse, of a power too great for mortals to understand. The city's once thriving population began to dwindle, as more and more people vanished into the night. The rulers, consumed by their own madness, paid little attention to the suffering of their people, focusing only on the dark power they had summoned. Stranger still were the reports of bizarre phenomena that began to plague the city. Some claimed to hear voices, others reported seeing strange lights in the sky at night, while others spoke of visions, terrifying otherworldly visions, that seemed to haunt them in their sleep. These were not the products of fevered minds, but real, tangible experiences that seemed to defy explanation. People began to question whether the city's rulers had truly found the answers they sought, or whether they had unwittingly opened a door to something far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. As the city descended into chaos, the once vibrant marketplaces grew silent, and the grand temples fell into disrepair. The streets, once bustling with activity, became eerily deserted. Even the grand palace, once the seat of power, stood empty, its halls echoing with the sounds of ghosts. The city, once the heart of an empire, was now a hollow shell of its former self. It was as if the very soul of the civilization had been drained, leaving behind only the ruins of what had once been. By the time the last of the inhabitants fled, the city was nothing more than a ghost town, a place where time itself seemed to have come to a standstill. But the ruins told a different story. They told of a society that had reached too far, that had dared to venture into realms that were never meant to be explored. The remnants of their civilization, the crumbling temples, the broken statues, the faded murals, were silent witnesses to the destruction that had befallen them. The disappearance of the people left behind a series of questions that would never be answered. Where did they go? Why did they leave? What had they discovered that was so terrifying that they abandoned everything they had worked for? Theories abound, but none can provide a satisfactory answer. Some believe the city's inhabitants left out of fear of the dark forces they had summoned, while others speculate that they were forced to flee by an external enemy, or perhaps by a disaster so great that it left them with no other choice. But the truth remains elusive, hidden beneath the layers of time and the rubble of the city. The city's legacy has lived on, however, not through its artifacts or its ruins, but through the myths and legends that have sprung up around it. Over the centuries, people have speculated about the city's true fate, and its story has taken on a life of its own. Some believe that the city's rulers were punished for their hubris, their ambition to control the forces of nature and the supernatural. Others think that the city's downfall was the result of a curse, a punishment from the gods for daring to challenge the natural order. Still, others believe that the city's inhabitants were simply the victims of their own greed and desire for power, a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeking to control forces that are beyond human understanding. But for those who have ventured into the ruins, the city's legacy is far more real. The strange symbols etched into the walls, the mysterious idols found in hidden chambers, the eerie atmosphere that seems to hang over the site, these are the things that haunt the imagination. The city's story in many ways has become a living entity, its mystery an enduring puzzle that continues to captivate those who seek to understand it. The unanswered questions, the strange occurrences, and the sense of something dark lurking just beyond the reach of human comprehension keep the legend of the city alive. And so, the city remains, abandoned but not forgotten. Its ruins continue to serve as a reminder of what happens when humanity dares to reach too far, to tamper with forces that should be left untouched. The answers may never come, but the legacy of the city endures, its mystery an enigma that has stood the test of time. Whether it was the result of a dark curse, a misguided quest for immortality, or something far more sinister, the city's downfall remains a cautionary tale, a story of ambition, hubris, and the consequences of seeking knowledge that should have remained hidden forever. As the ruins of the abandoned city slowly fade into the landscape, an unsettling silence has taken over. The once thriving metropolis, filled with the sounds of bustling markets, the clang of metal and the reverent chants of priests, now lies quiet, its secrets locked away beneath layers of time, dust and forgotten history. But though the city itself may no longer pulse with life, its story continues to haunt those who stumble across it, drawing in the curious, the ambitious, and the brave to search for the truth. Through the ages, the city has become more than just a historical curiosity. It has morphed into a symbol of lost potential, a cautionary tale of a civilization that soared too high and fell too far. Scholars, adventurers, and even thrill-seekers from around the world have made pilgrimages to its ruins, eager to piece together the puzzle of its rise and fall. But with each passing year, the mysteries surrounding the city only grow deeper, and the answers remain tantalizingly out of reach. Many of those who have ventured into the city's ruins claim to have felt a strange, almost palpable energy in the air, a sense of foreboding that lingers in the silence. It's as if the very ground is soaked with the history of the people who once walked there, a history filled with ambition, secrets, and ultimately tragedy. Some say they've heard whispers on the wind, faint voices carried through the cracks in the stones, as though the city itself is trying to speak. Others speak of strange shadows that seem to move just out of the corner of their eyes, or the sudden, inexplicable chill that sweeps through the air as they enter certain parts of the ruins. Whether these are simply the tricks of the mind, or something more profound, they add to the city's eerie, otherworldly presence. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the city is the lack of closure. The people who once lived there, who built the grand temples, crafted the intricate statues, and filled the streets with life, simply disappeared. No records, no explanations, just an empty city with no one left to tell its story. This is what has captured the imaginations of so many, for in that silence lies the greatest mystery. Why did they leave? What drove an entire civilization to abandon everything they had built? What did they discover or what did they fear that led them to flee? The absence of answers has given rise to countless theories, each one more compelling and disturbing than the last. Some believe the city was the victim of a curse, a wrathful punishment from the gods for some transgression, whether real or imagined. Others point to the city's rulers, who were known to engage in strange occult practices. Could it be that the city's leaders had somehow angered dark forces they couldn't control? Or perhaps, as some suggest, they had discovered something so terrifying that they chose to leave in order to escape its grasp. There are even those who claim the city was never abandoned at all, that it was deliberately hidden, its people vanishing from the world to protect themselves from something they could not understand, something they could not defeat. One of the most enduring theories suggests that the city was the site of an ancient and forbidden ritual, one that went horribly wrong. Some believe that the city's leaders, in their pursuit of power, attempted to summon a dark force or entity, a being from another realm. The evidence uncovered in the city's temples, the strange altars, the unexplainable symbols, the gruesome sacrifices, seem to support this idea. Perhaps the rulers of the city had become convinced that by tapping into this dark power, they could gain control over life and death itself. But what if they had unleashed something that was beyond their control? What if the very power they sought to command turned against them, driving them to madness and eventually forcing them to flee? The theory of the dark ritual is bolstered by the discoveries of strange, otherworldly artifacts found scattered throughout the ruins. Among them are objects that do not match any known civilization's tools, weapons, or religious items. These artifacts seem to belong to an unknown culture, one that predates even the city itself. Could these items have been brought into the city by its rulers in their search for forbidden knowledge? Or could they be remnants of the dark forces they sought to control? The very presence of these artifacts raises troubling questions. Who were the creators of these objects? And what, exactly, did they want with the city? Some researchers believe that the city's rulers were attempting to communicate with the beings or forces that existed beyond the physical world. The strange idols and symbols found in the temples may be evidence of this, ritualistic items designed to bridge the gap between this world and another. Some even speculate that these rituals involved sacrifices, human or otherwise, in order to appease these forces, offering up the city's very soul in exchange for power. But the city's final days suggest that something went terribly wrong. Instead of gaining power, the rulers may have awoken a force so malevolent that it consumed the city, leaving nothing behind but empty streets and crumbling buildings. But there is also the possibility that the city was not destroyed by some external or supernatural force at all. Perhaps the people left not because they were driven out, but because they knew something the rest of the world did not. Could the city have been abandoned as part of a larger plan, one that the rulers orchestrated in order to protect their people from a future they could not control? The sudden disappearance of the inhabitants, with no trace left behind, suggests that the city's downfall was not just the result of a catastrophe, but a calculated decision. The rulers may have known that the forces they had awakened could not be contained, and in their wisdom they chose to disappear, leaving the city to its fate. What is certain, however, is that the city's fall was not a simple accident. It wasn't the result of an earthquake, an invasion, or a plague. There were no obvious signs of violence or destruction, and the people didn't die en masse. Instead, they left, quietly, mysteriously, and without a trace. The city's greatest treasure, its knowledge and power, was abandoned, perhaps to ensure that it would never fall into the wrong hands again. But who were they trying to protect? And from what? The absence of answers has led to a growing fascination with the city, and with the mysterious force that may have shaped its fate. It is no longer just a forgotten ruin, it is a place of intrigue, a site that calls out to those who seek the truth, even if that truth may be too horrifying to comprehend. Many who have studied the city come away with more questions than answers, and some are even left with a sense of dread, an awareness that the city's story is far from over. There are still secrets hidden in its walls, waiting to be uncovered, and perhaps some truths are better left undisturbed. In recent years, interest in the city has increased, with more and more expeditions being launched to explore its depths. Some of these expeditions have yielded new discoveries, strange artifacts, ancient texts, and even evidence of long-lost rituals. Yet, with each new find, the sense of foreboding only deepens. It is as though the more we learn, the more we uncover, the more we realize that we may be playing with forces far beyond our understanding. For some, the city has become a symbol of mankind's unrelenting desire to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. But for others, it is a reminder that some truths are better left buried. The legend of the abandoned city, with all its mysteries and unanswered questions, continues to cast a long shadow. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of ambition, of the pursuit of power without understanding the consequences. The people of the city may have believed that they were on the verge of discovering something extraordinary, something that would elevate them to a higher plane of existence. But in the end, they paid the ultimate price for their hubris. The city's abandonment, its eerie silence, and the strange remnants left behind are all that remain of a once great civilization. The answers may never be found, but the legacy of the city will continue to haunt the world for generations to come. The city's abandonment, a phenomenon still as mysterious as it was centuries ago, leaves an indelible mark on those who attempt to study it. It is not merely the physical remnants, crumbling buildings, abandoned streets, and shattered statues, that captivate the imagination, but the profound silence that permeates everything. The city stands as an eerie testament to the fragility of civilization and the fleeting nature of human achievement. The vast stretches of empty city blocks, now slowly being overtaken by nature, offer an unsettling sense of emptiness that cannot be easily explained by any logical or historical event. What transpired here is not just a question of archaeology, but of the unseen forces that may have been at play. For years, the theories surrounding the city's sudden disappearance have ranged from the plausible to the fantastic. The lack of written records, the absence of any clear explanation, has left ample room for speculation. Did the people leave because of an external threat? Perhaps they were caught in a violent war with neighboring states or empires, forced to abandon their homes in the face of invasion. However, the lack of war artifacts, signs of military conflict, or mass graves casts doubt on this theory. There was no battle, no sudden military assault, no sign that anyone came to the city's gates in force. The city wasn't overrun, it was emptied. The fact that people seem to vanish overnight is the central enigma, suggesting something far more profound than mere conflict or conquest. For others, the city's fall is best understood through the lens of human psychology, particularly that of a ruling class that grew obsessed with power, immortality, and supernatural forces. It is widely believed that the city's rulers, driven by ambition and an insatiable thirst for control, may have embarked on an insidious journey to unlock the ultimate secret, the mastery of life and death. This path led them to delve into practices that most cultures had long abandoned, or perhaps never dared to explore. They sought not just knowledge but a form of transcendence, a way to control fate itself. Many scholars believe that the rulers used the city's wealth and influence to access rare, forbidden texts, knowledge lost to time. These were not just any ancient writings but documents tied to the occult, to ancient gods, to forgotten rituals that blurred the lines between the living and the dead. Through these texts, the rulers were said to have come into contact with powers beyond their comprehension, entities or forces that transcended the boundaries of the mortal world. Some of the most unsettling discoveries within the ruins suggest that this wasn't simply an intellectual pursuit, but an active engagement with those otherworldly powers. Evidence of rituals, some involving blood sacrifices, others of a more mysterious nature, hint at a desperation, a drive to harness these forces, a drive that likely led to the city's undoing.